White House threatens executive orders on guns. I told you that was coming. Larry Pratt, executive director of Gun Owners of America, told you that. There have been a lot of tweets sent out calling for my death, calling for Larry Pratt's death, calling for Wayne LaPierre's death at NRA. They say we killed the children. They say it's our fault. Bad things happen. There's 7.5 billion people in the world, or close to it. 315 million here. They wave the bloody shirt of 20 poor dead children we pray for, their families, and then tell us we did it when they're the ones that made them victim disarmament zones. And I told you, they're going to use an executive order. The ATF last year started telling gun shops what to do outside law, and they told them, hey, don't argue. When he's reelected, we'll do whatever we want. I talked to multiple gun show people in Tennessee, in Arizona, in California, and Austin. We broke that they were being given memos, and they said, well, there's no law. This law didn't pass. And they said, well, you do what we say or we're going to shut you down. We found an I that wasn't dotted, literally. And now when you go in to do your background, it's all put in a computer. It all when you call the feds, it's all computerized. You're already registered. They're now saying they're going to physically take the semi-autos. Like Dianne Feinstein said, Mr. and Mrs. America, get ready to turn your guns in. That's a quote. And then Piers Morgan says, I don't want your guns. I just want you to turn all these in. And then I get angry at him. And then he says, I'm dangerous and shouldn't have guns when I have no criminal record. And then the next night, last night, and the man we're about to talk to is scheduled to be on there tonight, Larry Pratt, and again, Piers Morgan doesn't have a big audience, but when it's a gun debate, it goes in all the other news and tens of millions, probably 100 million. I mean, this is the biggest story in the last 2 days, is what I did with Piers Morgan. And that wasn't my full plan, but it was part of it. If he pulled bull, I was going to get in his face because all he ever does is bully people. So I gave him his own medicine back. They're going to use this to purge and persecute gun owners, and it is going to be an unmitigated nightmare for police and military. Who, even if you try to carry it out, I mean, it's a death sentence. And that's the globalist plan. They've been preparing for this, and police are like, you're right, if this happens, it's going to be horrible, but they wouldn't dare. Yes, they will. And they're getting it ready for another executive order with the next mass shooting will happen with all their hyping. And now we have them saying, Larry, I called you this morning to get you on when you were driving into work. Have you had a chance to see the CNN clip now where the host and his two guests talk about shooting me and agree it's okay as long as they wear a uniform?
Alec, I haven't had a chance to even look at a clock. I've been so nonstop. But I'll tell you what, you were just discussing this executive order. That is something that I believe I might have even talked about on your show, because you've been nice enough to have me on so many times. But sometime well into last year, it occurred to me, these guys don't have the votes in Congress. And after the election, it was clear they didn't have the votes in Congress for the next Congress either. But Obama has shown by what he's done in other areas, such as immigration, he'll just bloody well do what he wants and issue an executive order against the law, against the Constitution. Hey, when you're socializing the country, what's a few broken laws here and there? They were only put on the books by a bunch of dead people that aren't here anymore. It's our country now, and I want it because I got elected. And so I think he believes he might have been elected king, although even the British king has far less power than what he's presuming. But I saw what they would do. If you assume the guy is lawless, then you don't have to be a prophet, and I'm not a prophet, but I could see that would be, for him, the course of least resistance. That's where his water would flow, if you will. And he's doing it.
Well, I had Ron Paul on, and you just heard me basically paraphrase what he said. He agreed that they want a civil war. They know what they're doing. If they think they're going to get 160 million gun owners to turn their guns in, there will be a percentage that's not going to go along with it.
Well, it's very, very, very critical that if anything bad comes down, that it be very clear that it was the government initiating violence. Remember Lexington and Concord. That day's battle was started by the British because I think his name was Preston or Prescott. The captain on Lexington Green said, hold your fire until fired upon. And if I recall correctly, there were a couple of guys that died almost immediately following that order because the British did fire first.
Yeah, quite a few of them, but that gave them the
moral high ground.
Moral high ground.
And I think it's absolutely essential that that we hold our fire, that we even be willing to perhaps be the first one down, because we are in a war of ideas, a monster culture clash, and it's absolutely essential that we be perceived as the law-abiding ones, as the lawful ones. We need to make it understandable that there are two kinds of rebels. There's the rebel who goes out in the mountains on his own and is out there kind of like Robin Hood shooting people. And then there's the rebel that comes with a badge. If either one of them are acting outside the law, that makes them a rebel. And I know the statists of our time can't get it through their head that they could be the rebels. But the Constitution was put up to strictly limit what the federal government can do.
Well, that's profound what you said. When Lenin took over and then Stalin, they were rebels, and they even call us counter-revolutionaries. That's what Bill Ayers and Obama in his training, they know they're the rebels. That's why they operate like this and are buying 1.6 billion bullets and armored vehicles and demonizing real Americans, because they are an occupying rebel enemy force against the Republic, and you're absolutely right.
So we need to remember the Battle of Lexington. That ultimately went very poorly for the British that day because our guys insisted that the moral high ground be theirs. And that may take a lot more courage than would be needed to go and hide behind a rock and shoot, which they did later in the day. But to stand there at first, naked against the British ball that was coming down at them out of those muskets, that was real courage. But they knew why they were there. And in fact, their preacher had preached on that the Sunday before, and he was there with them because he believed as much as they did what he'd been preaching about.
I believe he died.
I don't remember that, but that's entirely possible because it was not a fun day for either side. The British ultimately lost about a quarter to a third of their entire regiment that they sent out, some 800 guys. Not that many made it back. And more importantly, we were able to get to London ahead of the British couriers and point out what had happened and who had fired first, and that it was this oppressive government that we'd been hollering about for 4 and 6 years in formal petitions, petitions of right, bills of right, all those kinds of things were going over to the British mainland, being published in their newspapers, and then it finally came to that. And so I think we have to remember that history, the history that's not being taught in our government schools.
Sure.
But our forefathers did it right, and God willing,
yes, sir,
we'll do it right.
I can't believe we're to the point that we're having to talk about 1775, 1776. I mean, this is not a joke. And I had you on a few weeks ago, and I said, from all I've seen, this will be the greatest assault ever. And you said it's shaping up to be that. Undoubtedly now, Larry Pratt of gunowners.org, this is clearly the greatest assault ever.
Certainly in my lifetime. For a while I've been comparing it to Columbine, but I'm beginning to think that they are much bolder than they were even back in Columbine. And one of the guys here made a suggestion, which I still think could well be the case, and that is they've overreached. What Dianne Feinstein has proposed in her legislation is so far beyond what she, got enacted in '94, that they're essentially, with a few exceptions, coming for it all. Her much vaunted statement after she'd enacted her quote-unquote limited gun ban of 1994 was, well, I just didn't have the votes. Otherwise, I'd have said, Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in. Well, we know what her objectives are, so we shouldn't be fooled. She's told us. And she's now indicating that she wants more. Now, I think she's getting greedy, and I think we can use that against her. And God willing, that's exactly what's going to happen.
But what about an executive order? I mean, Congress has got to start impeachment now with just Biden.
Impeachment and defunding. Without money, guarantee you, Alex, none of these Jaspers here inside the Beltway are volunteers. They're extremely well paid. I'm sure that 99% of your listeners would love to have what this 1% that works here in the government class is being paid. So this is definitely something that can be solved partially by money. If we can get around the Speaker of the House, who is like a downed tank blocking a bridge, and if somehow we can build another bridge or get him off the bridge in some way, then I think we could actually enact a spending measure that had a proviso in it. None of these funds may be used for the implementation of executive order, whatever it might be.
Well, sure, go ahead.
They're out of gas at that point.
You have always, again, been a very measured, calm person, and I'm like that in private. When I get wound up, I get very, very upset, and, you know, did that with Piers Morgan because he's always been a bully. I was not going to let him bully me, so I just basically dominated him. But I want to play you a clip here because this is what was said last night, amongst other things. They said they hope my children don't end up dead, and then there was this. So I'm going to play it for you now. Piers Morgan and guests discuss shooting Alex Jones. Daily Beast writer Buzz Bissinger says Piers Morgan should pop Alex Jones with a semi-automatic weapon. Then Huntsman's daughter, Abby Huntsman, of the Huffington Post, says, I'd love to see that, laughter in a uniform. Piers Morgan, I'd borrow my brother's uniform, who reportedly is an Army officer. So I guess if it's a uniform, it's okay. I want to play this clip and get your take on it. Here it is.
A semi-automatic weapon for. The only reason I think you need it is, Piers, challenge Alex Jones to a boxing match, show up with a semi-automatic that you got legally, and pop him.
I'd love to see that. In uniform.
I'll borrow my brother's uniform. And then there was talk of, I hope my children don't get killed. I mean, and this is entering a whole nother level of Creepville.
What they did there is reveal the heart of the leftist. The leftist is about force. They're about imposing their righteousness on us schlubs that don't know what's good for us. And it's such a delightful topic to talk about offing some loudmouth like Alex Jones. That'll teach those bumpkins a thing or two, won't it?
Yeah, I guess it will. My children were there watching when their deaths were being discussed. I mean, they're clearly trying to terrorize the entire American people with these shootings. While they're horrible, statistically, it's one of the rarest forms of death.
Right. Along with our general murder rate, which is declining. And I was just looking at something, happily, my son Eric pulled something up that's quite good. There's an underreporting of murder data in England, which is always held up as the country that's so wonderful compared to ours. British crime, I'm quoting from the finding, reporting tactics keep murder rates artificially low. And then this is a quote from a report from the Inspectorate of Constabulary. Suppose that 3 men kill a woman during an argument outside a bar. They are arrested for murder, but because of problems with identification, quote, or the main witness is dead, charges are eventually dropped. In American crime statistics, the event counts as a 3-person homicide, but in British statistics, it counts as nothing at all. And then the report is quoted directly here. With such differences, this is British, 2000, with such differences in reporting criteria, comparisons of U.S. homicide rates with British homicide rates is a sham. That's the British cop group, the Inspectorate of Constabulary.
Wow, can I have that headline? Because I've got the Telegraph and others admitting that they're the crime capital of Europe. Switzerland has the lowest crime rate in the world because, of course, they have more guns. But you can just type in Britain or England, the crime capital of Europe. People are beat, stabbed, you name it. But, yeah, I read all the time where if you fist fight someone raping your wife that busts in your house, they throw the book at you. You know, the farmer who'd been robbed 3 times defending himself, and they threw him in prison. I mean,
they probably give some condoms to the guy that was raping your wife and tell him to clean up his act.
Amazing. I know. I mean, but see, that's on purpose. That's a criminal government with trying to team up with the criminals. Why do they love crime-ridden cities run by mafias?
Well, because we're then terrorized, and we must depend all the more for our, quote, protection on the very authorities that have put us into that predicament to begin with. And I don't know whether they're accepting it in England, although it is, as the Telegraph said 2 days after that Piers Morgan interview, it is the is the fourth most violent country in the world. Violent crime, which would include murder, but also rape and everything else that's
And that's with watered down numbers, because I've seen those numbers before that they just let murder. I mean, they don't even investigate when they come to your house and you and your wife are chopped up. I mean, it's just like you could have the neighbor running around with a hand in their hand of a chopped off person. They just say, oh, no big deal.
Right. They do not believe in self-defense. That farmer was infamous that up in the little town of Norfolk in England had, after the third home invasion by the same gypsy gang members that had been terrorizing the whole area, he shot one of them in the dark of night who was coming up the stairs. Actually shot both of them and killed one of them. And for that, they gave him a life sentence, which now he's out of jail because, happily, British public opinion finally focused on that outrage.
And see, that's what scares me, is that I'm still a young man, 38, but I've got aches and pains and things and, problems now from a life of action. I can't imagine once I get old and all I can depend on is the gun. I mean, if two guys are coming up my stairs, I'm going to get so angry. Even if they're pretty tough, I can probably deal with them. But not when I'm 65, 70. I need that firearm. And more now, I mean, as I get older, more and more I try to avoid physical stuff. It's just natural. We need to equalize things for the infirm, the old, the women, handicapped. I mean, the real liberal thing to do is to arm women.
Exactly. Exactly. And to make it so that unarmed children can be protected by their teachers, the janitors, whatever, in schools, rather than insist for now 20 years that if we just say no guns at schools, everything will be fine. Well, everything is not fine. That's where most of our, in fact, that's where all of our mass murders have occurred.
We can't have a totally armed society.
We'll never get a handgun ban with the Second Amendment as stated.
I don't know. I don't know that we can't.
None of these rights are absolute. None of them.
Senator Dianne Feinstein was the author of the assault weapons ban in 1994.
Professor Koppel, was the 1994 assault weapons ban a sensible and effective means of reducing gun violence?
Based on the Department of Justice study, the answer was no.
The assault weapons ban made sense.
And just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
Do they need a bazooka?
No one's taking away all the guns.
No one will be able to be armed. We will take all weapons.
I'd love to see that. In uniform.
I will not take your shotgun away. I will not take your rifle away. I won't take your handgun away.
Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in.